Phalanx is a shoot-'em-up that often gets overlooked by some of the genre's heavyweights like R-Type and Gradius on the Super Nintendo. The story is pretty standard and doesn't offer anything that hasn't been tried out before, but Phalanx does get something right, which has to be the way in which it balances its gameplay with the several options it presents to the player, an immense amount of power-ups and weapons that can be scored throughout each mission, that make taking on the hordes of enemies all the more possible. You have the usual assortment of upgrades such as lasers, homing and ricochet among others, but what's really neat is that you can store up to 3 of the power-ups at any one time and switch between them on the fly. This mechanic really comes in handy during the several boss encounters, which are each meticulously designed both visually and mechanically. Each force the player to study their movements and construct a strategy around them in order to gain victory. I really cannot recommend Phalanx enough. It's not spectacular by any means, but it's a really solid shoot-'em-up that deserves a spot in any Super Nintendo fan's collection. Whoever thought about mixing the franchise of Mega Man with the world of soccer needs a medal. On the surface, the game is absolutely nonsensical, but for those that give it some time, a truly innovative experience is on offer, which is bound to satisfy both fans of the popular hero as well as the sport alike. Now, getting to grips with the gameplay certainly takes some time. Your team is made up of a range of franchise characters which all possess different attributes that will help you during each match. Some are really slow and strong, while others are speedy and accurate, but no character is without a weakness. This sense of stability really adds to the flow of each game and rewards you for taking advantage of each player that's on the field, mainly by creating holes in the opposing team's defense and opening up the opportunity to score a goal. Visually, Capcom did a great job bringing each character to life, with each of the sprites being presented in a vibrant and crisp manner. It carves out a distinct style that the game can call its own and helps it stand out amongst the range of soccer games available on the system. If you've never given it a go and are a fan of the sport, it is well worth checking out. Now let's get the bad stuff out of the way first. Metal Warriors portrays what has to be one of the most uninspired stories you're likely ever to come across. But with that aside, the several aspects that make up the gameplay is what truly helps the game succeed. The experience is split up into a series of missions that naturally increase in difficulty the further you progress. But it's not just simply a matter of blasting everything in sight and finding the exit. Throughout each level, a variety of puzzles will often present themselves which provide a real sense of challenge. Bringing it all together is the multiplayer mode, which in my opinion is the real highlight of Metal Warriors. It pits both you and a friend against one another and sees you having to find weapons to attack your opponent with, use strategies to defeat them, and to gain health when you are running low. It really adds to the overall replay value of the game, and although there are better offerings of the same kind on the system, like Metal Slug for example, this one is still worth picking up. Originally known as Panel de Pon, Tetris Attack is another take on the popular franchise that centers around the use of Nintendo characters, but instead of eliminating lines of blocks like the original, the objective is to simply line up rows and columns of 3 tiles or more, which results in them being eliminated from the field. Each row continually rises from the bottom of the screen, and if you reach the top, it's game over. The entire game is comprised of several modes from endless to time trial, puzzle, versus and stage clear, with the most challenging being that of stage clear mode, which forces you to battle through 30 stages of increasing difficulty. On top of this, there's a 2-player option that adds even more replayability to the already robust offering, and what you get is one of the finest puzzlers on the Super Nintendo. One main aspect that also helps the game shine has to be the music, as every playable character has their own specific theme. Although they can differ from each other sometimes drastically, they fit the feel of the game and stage you're playing on perfectly. With its vibrant graphics, memorable music, and easy to learn but hard to master gameplay, Tetris Attack will keep coming back time and time again. The Super Nintendo is no stranger to impressive fighting games, with the likes of Street Fighter 2, Killer Instinct and Mortal Kombat to name a few, but as with most consoles, some games go by largely unnoticed, and Weapon Lord is one of them. On the surface it is simply a weapons-based fighter, but once you dig deeper it soon becomes apparent that there is a lot more to the game than what initially meets the eye. It's comprised of many mechanics, such as a parrying system known as thrust blocking, as well as deflect moves to name a few, that help propel it beyond its contemporaries on the system. Now each each playable character shares basic attacks and combos that can be mixed with their individual special moves. By doing so, it's possible to unleash devastating advances on the enemy, which often end in a death combo. Weapon Lord's take on Mortal Kombat's popular fatalities. Although it's not the best fighter on the system by any means, Weapon Lord probably stands tall, all the while introducing many aspects that would be emulated by its rivals for years to come. If you're a fan of the genre, it well and truly deserves a go. Ogre Battle is a strategic RPG that takes place in a land known as Zenobi. It's set in a time where wizards and warriors are all fighting to survive under the rule of a religious group who have managed to seize power of the kingdom. It sees the players setting out on an adventure to ultimately turn the tide, and as with most strategy RPGs, the action is all presented on a grid, with several types of characters being at your disposal. Each encounter is presented in a turn-based fashion and sees you taking advantage of all the options each unit presents. From magical-based attacks and benefits to physical assaults such as arrows and swords, there is always a way out of each situation you'll find yourself presented with, but it's not always so clean cut. Bad placement or not preparing correctly before entering battle can often find your team decimated within the blink of an eye. Your decisions outside of battle also matter as well, deciding to capture a town here, liberate one there, or even just accepting the aid of a mercenary or hero into your army. All of these things affect the outcome of the game. If you're looking for something that requires you to really think and contemplate your actions, then this is the game for you. It's one of the best that any system of its age has to offer. Lufia 2 has to be one of the most underrated RPGs on the Super Nintendo. It never really got the recognition that it deserved, and when you put it next to the likes of Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger, it's kind of easy to see why. But for what Lufia 2 lacks in originality, it more than makes up for in gameplay. This is where the experience truly comes into its own. Buried beneath the generic story and visuals is a fun and engaging battling system, as well as several head-scratching puzzles that start out simply enough, but soon become one of the more rewarding aspects of the adventure that is bound to test even the most proficient of players. To top all of this off is the inclusion of monsters that can be captured, trained and ultimately used to aid you in battle. By feeding them unwanted items and equipment, it's possible for them to evolve into even more formidable allies, with each possessing their own special abilities and attributes that really offer a great deal of variety. Overall, Lufia 2 is a competent RPG that is bound to satisfy longtime fans of the genre as well as curious newcomers. Mystical Ninja is an action-adventure with a truly distinct style that it can call its own. It all centers around a young man named Goemon and his friend Dr. Yang. What truly stands out is the gameplay that Mystical Ninja presents. It's essentially broken up into a series of side-scrolling levels known as Warlock Zones that see you exploring towns and gathering information whilst taking on wave after wave of enemies with your trusty yo-yo or stick. By finding specific items, it's possible to upgrade the effectiveness of each of these weapons, which manage to help even the odds when things get really tight. Further expanding your options in combat are special attacks known as judo abilities. There are 4 to learn for both characters. You'll be able to fly for short periods of time or even call upon animal companions to fight at your side. Now, I could not talk about Mystical Ninja without mentioning the incredible amount of minigames which are included. Although often quirky and seemingly out of place, they all manage to add a nice distraction to the main adventure and help the game stand out even further. If it passed you by, now is the perfect time to give it a go for yourself. Secret of Evermore follows the adventure of a young boy and his dog after they have been transported to another world. This new and strange environment is made up of several dimensions that all represent different areas of the real world. You'll find yourself travelling way into the past and the future as the journey unfolds. Now, gameplay wise, it shares much in common with the likes of Secret of Mana. You'll be gaining experience points and levelling up your character, but one area where it significantly differs is the huge emphasis upon alchemy. Across the adventure, you'll be collecting several formulas that are required in order to use magic. Some of these formulas are well hidden and offer a nice incentive to explore each and every area thoroughly. Battles play out in real time, and depending on your equipment, there are several ways to deal with enemies. May that be a few thrusts with a sword or a fully blown charged attack that deals heavier amounts of damage. Although not the best RPG on the system, Secret of Evermore is still one that deserves a look. Illusion of Gaia is an action RPG that shares many similarities with the likes of Zelda. Its battling system takes place all within real time, which can see a multitude of enemies descending upon you at once. Players assume the role of a young man named Will, who wields a flute as a weapon and gains powerful psychic abilities throughout the adventure to help aid in battle. Further into the journey, 2 more characters eventually become available for the player to use, which each have their own set of skills as well. The game provides a real incentive to take advantage of each character, which manages to offer a great amount of diversity in gameplay. The general progression of the experience will see players visiting a huge variety of dungeons and towns in order to advance the plot and develop each character, but most of it takes place within dungeons that are home to a range of enemies and various puzzles that require the use of each character's abilities to complete. If you missed out on this one back in the day, there's never been a better time than now to check it out. Well, that does it for today's video. Don't forget to hit subscribe and make sure you hit that notification bell, as subscriptions don't mean that much on YouTube anymore. As always, thanks for watching this video, and I'll catch you next time.